Come on in, guys. Welcome to the Sit-Out Bench. I'm Matt.
And I'm Joe. We're two friends from the Midlands who are absolutely die-hard Survivor fans. We're excited for you to join us for pre-season, in-season, and post-season content focusing on Survivor UK. You can follow us on Instagram, on Twitter, follow us, interact with us, and definitely give us a 5-star review on Spotify, Apple Podcast, or wherever you're listening to the pod.
On today's episode, we're going to be doing our final cast capital of the season of Survivor UK. We've got the final coming up this weekend.
So take your spot on the sit-out bench and let's get started. It's amazing to be together, Matt, on what is a glorious, glorious run-up to the final 2 episodes of Survivor UK. It feels like everything's set up really nicely. I'm just pumped, to be honest, for Saturday. Saturday's turning out to be a really, really busy day. How are you going to be watching the final, Matt?
I'm not entirely sure yet. I've booked the day off so that I can...
Wow.
my big question is, what do I do in that gap where Strictly Come Dancing's on? And I don't know, I need to find something to do to keep myself occupied.
Listen, I think you have 2 options. Either you live tweet for 3 hours, or you have to watch Strictly Come Dancing, which is...
I'll just live tweet me staring at my wall.
Honestly, this Saturday's going to be absolutely crazy. I am doing a family thing in the afternoon. I'm probably going to be watching Survivor in the car as I drive back. It's UFC 296 in the evening, so I'll be a watch party for that, but yeah, it's going to be an amazing 2 hours of television, 2 hours of our lives. When we both hit 40, I think we'll look back at this day and we'll think, whew, 16th of December. That was the day when we became men.
Oh, God.
Maybe.
Just maybe.
Before we really get into thinking about the final 5 contestants that are left and what we think their winning pitch can be this coming Saturday, we have to talk about some breaking news that was given to us by friend of the pod at Scott_Ransom on Instagram. And this was a crazy one, Matt. We both missed this because this happened on Sunday after episode 14, just after the credits had finished rolling. Matt, can you break down what Scott told us?
Yes, so Scott messaged us and let us know that after the episode aired, there was a trailer once the credits were over. Apparently, it actually shows who's in the final 4 immunity challenge. It's a good job we missed that one. We're still spoiler free here. And also, there's apparently a hint of something which could completely shake up the endgame as well. It's exciting to know that it's not just going to be a straightforward few votes at the finale here.
It feels very on brand, though, for BBC Survivor in episode 1 for them to tell us the final 6, and a week before the final to tell us the final 4.
Yeah, at least they only let us know one person. Yeah.
Can you imagine if they just showed a picture of the final jury and the 3 people?
The final vote read for who's winning the season. Handing over a check.
It does tie quite nicely though into what I've been feeling for a while. So ever since we've had our debate around whether or not it would be a final 2 or a final 3 at that final tribal council, one of the things that's really stuck in my mind is this idea of how comfortable would the BBC and production be with having an 8-person jury, and the potential of having kind of like a 4-4 tie from the jury. So when I'm thinking about what the potential twist could be in these final 2 episodes, I strongly believe that one of the things that either someone who wins a challenge or maybe finds an advantage at some point in the game is that they'll be presented an opportunity to really undertake a classic Survivor twist, to be able to vote someone off of the jury before the final tribal council, ultimately making it a 7-person jury instead of an 8. How do you feel about that twist, Matt, if it happens?
In terms of this jury setup, obviously, if they follow the US version, in that case, the 3rd person would become the final member of the jury and vote for the winner. But I do still think it's a possibility that we did get the jury removal twist, because obviously a 7-person jury doesn't divide nicely into the 3 people, so they're guaranteed to get a winner that way. Jury remover is a bit of a hot and cold twist for me. Obviously, I'm not a big fan of the fact that someone's opportunity to be on that jury gets taken away, especially if it's like a later person that was voted onto the jury. But I do also like the drama that it brings, and also the opportunity for someone to really strategize and work out the best way for them to get the most votes at the end.
It's always disappointing though, because it tends to be that people always take off people who are particularly salty, who have a lot of problems. And I, for one, am going to be gutted if we don't get a really salty Lee or an angry Ash, saying how they really feel about someone.
Yeah, I think taking away the drama is never good for the show. So ultimately, I probably do hope that we don't get this twist here.
Well, only time will tell. But for today's episode, we'll be running through the final 5 contestants of Survivor UK. We'll be giving our opinion on who they think, if they had the opportunity, they would vote out from the jury. We'll also be thinking about which 2 people they would want to sit with them in the final 3. And we'll also be giving our version of what their winning pitch could potentially be in order to make sure they secure the 4 votes that they need to become the sole survivor. We're going to start very much with the man that we have come to know and love. Big love to Mr. X himself, Chris_Hall. And Matt transparently said that he's rooting for him. Let's start with Chris, Matt. If Chris had the chance to vote someone out, who do you think he goes for, and why is it Lee?
Yeah, I was going to say it's Lee. I don't need to give any explanation there. It's just Lee. They fell out. Lee would have to be hard pushed to vote for him to win. I think that's absolutely who he tries to take on the jury here. In terms of who he should probably sit next to, Leilani and probably Hannah. I think he wants to probably avoid sitting with Matt, because Matt's made moves like he has, but he's also got some good friends on that jury. And I think also you want to avoid sitting next to Pegleg, who's just an all-around stand-up guy if you've made a few enemies, because obviously people are going to look for a reason to vote for anyone but Chris, and Pegleg being there is an easy reason to not vote for Chris at the end of the day.
You bang on the money. He votes out Lee. If a guy spends time calling you Curly Chris and has poisoned the well at the jury for however long, you don't want to have to answer a question from him. And the awkward thing is that, apart from Leilani, I think Lee votes for anyone else except Chris. So Lee is the easy person to take off the jury. I think his story has to go something like this. He has to say, started from the bottom, now we're here. And that has to be the whole thing, that he played the game from the bottom, but when it was really critical, he had enough influence to flip the votes when it mattered the most. By especially getting rid of Matthew, what it allows him to do is to take credit for the Tanuke votes. I think he probably has enough credibility where he could take responsibility for the Nathan vote as well. In a very sort of laid-back, more strategic way, he can say, these are my kind of things. He can also hang his hat on the fact that he is the only person in Survivor UK that has correctly played an immunity idol. I don't believe we can count Nathan's immunity idol as a correct play.
No.
So he's the only person who's done that, which is, a real milestone, something really, really phenomenal. And I think, for me, he has to really pour salt on the fact that whilst everyone else wasn't playing Survivor, he was the one person that was willing to do it, even if that meant he got a little bit dirty. For me, if he does that, I think he does potentially get the 4 votes. I think it's a really close one, but I do think he could get Doug, Lawrence, Matt, and Ash. I think those are the 4 people that he has to try and influence with his story.
Yeah, I agree. Those are absolutely the 4 votes that he can possibly get up for grabs here. I agree with what you said about what he should argue. I think he's got the strategic aspect of the game where he's obviously made these great moves. He has the social aspect of the game where he convinced people to vote for Tanuke over him. And he can claim his physical game as well, where he's won quite a few challenges. So he can argue everything. It's literally going to come down to whether people like him or not. That's going to decide whether or not he wins.
And he's definitely looking for just a few key people. Ash is always going to give him his votes. Matt, at this point, is definitely going to give him the vote if he's there. And so really, he's just trying to sway two out of the remaining 5. Well, we've talked about Matt. Let's move then to Matt. Matt probably has the easiest chance of winning if he gets to the final 3. That probably means he's got the hardest route to get through these next 2 episodes. But thinking about Matt and, who's he going to be best to be sat with? Who does he vote out from the jury? Where's your head at, Matt?
So in terms of the jury remover, I think this is the most difficult one, because if he takes out, say, Tanuke, who he blindsided, that's immediately probably going to lose him the Calaton votes. So actually, I think the safer route for Matt is to take out maybe Ash, someone who is probably not going to give him. Well, I think she probably could give him the vote, but voting her out is not going to stop anyone else from giving him their votes. Ash is probably the safest option there. In terms of who he should sit next to, again, Leilani, Hannah. I also think Chris as well. Matt beats Chris quite easily. They have the same things that they can argue, but Matt has the added benefit of being well liked by the jury,
Yeah.
and also choosing to make a massive move that completely changes the course of his game. He has the most agency there. Everything Chris has done, while being great moves, has also been defensive, whereas Matt's move was, offensive.
I think you've definitely made the right call. For me, he sits next to Chris and Leilani. I think that's his best combination to get to the end. And I think you're right. In that scenario, Matt gets credit for the Tanuke vote, for the Nathan vote, way more than Chris does. It's really interesting about, though, who he would vote out, and it's kind of an audible. If he leaves Ash on the jury, she 100%, I think, votes for Chris in this scenario. She's probably one of the votes that's kind of locked in. And so I think his decision is between, do I take away a definite vote for Chris, or do I potentially vote out Tanuke from the jury, who may be slightly bitter towards me and maybe influencing other votes? Do you ever see a world where he maybe votes out Tanuke from the jury, or is that too much relationship there, you think?
I see a world where he does it, but I think that would be a bad move. Tanuke is more likely to vote for Matthew than choose to vote for Chris, even though, they've had an up and down relationship. Chris ultimately was part of that move to get rid of Tanuke, and they were on opposite sides, so I don't think it's too detrimental to have her voting on a jury for him. I do want to quickly touch on Peg as well, because obviously we said that Peg would not be a good person for Matthew to sit next to. And I think, again, that comes down to this: if you don't like this person, here's who you throw a vote at. And I think that's very much what's going to benefit Peg throughout all of these jury combinations, is that he is the most likable person, the most respected person. And we said this in our cast assessment way back when as well, that if Pegleg gets to the end, he's most likely going to win. I think he really has to watch Pegleg. I do think he has a better argument than Pegleg. I do think he can claim more moves than Pegleg. But I just think, with this being the first season, is the jury going to respect gameplay? And that's the risk that you have to weigh up there.
I think with that combination, if Pegleg's gone, he can play the middle of, I didn't play the game as hard as Chris, but I played it more than I did Leilani. Whereas Pegleg can also play that very sort of middle of the road, I was strategic, but I wasn't a dick as well. What I'm kind of worried about is that if Matthew does get there in his final tribal pitch, he's going to start talking about loyalty. I think he's going to talk about how great Calaton was and the loyalty they built there. But obviously that he recognised that there was a moment where he wasn't going to win, and that's why he flipped. I think it's a fairly solid narrative. I think there are lots of people on the jury who would agree with that. And I actually think there's probably 6 people in this scenario who vote for him. I think probably Tanuke does. Lee definitely does. And I also have Hannah, Lawrence, and Pegleg as probably people who would sway towards him in this sort of final 3.
I think even Nathan as well, potentially.
Yeah, totally agree.
I think Matthew has the ability to sweep quite a few jury combinations here.
Yeah. And the fact that he is so dangerous, I think what makes it such a risk for him in episode 15, because if we can see that, everyone else on the island can see that too.
At the very least, Chris is going to target that, I think.
Let's move then to Pegleg. And I really, really like Pegleg's chances here if he gets through to a final 3. And for me, the optimum people for him to be sat next to are Hannah and Leilani. That just feels like the right move. In this one, I did really struggle because I think he has a really sympathetic jury across the board. Ultimately, I reckon Pegleg votes out Lawrence simply because he knows Lawrence the least. It feels like they don't have a particularly strong relationship. But equally, it didn't feel like there was anyone on the jury that had been really burned by Pegleg. He kind of couldn't save through a jury speech. And again, he has a really powerful one. He is the person with the most individual immunity wins. I really like his chances as well if he gets rid of Chris or Matthew in episode 15 of winning that final challenge. I think he said I won the final challenge. He talks about his social game, about having an alliance with Hannah since day 2 that was hidden under the radar, and can also really lean on this fact of I found the right shields to keep me out of danger the whole way. I had Doug, I had Lee, I had all these people that I put in front of me to make sure he got as far as he did. And actually, in a game that's not designed for someone with one leg, he's the survivor.
Yeah, I completely agree with all of that. I think he's got a very good journey and a very good narrative to argue at the end. In terms of who he's voting out for a jury removal, I do think Ash is there as an obvious option again. I really hope this jury removal twist is not there because I really think Ash is in trouble if it is. And I just think not only does that take out someone who was against him on Oldland and is not really going to upset anyone else, but I think it kind of adds to probably Lee's enjoyment of the. I mean, I'm sure that Lee and Ash have got over their differences at Ponderosa, but I do think there's still an element of sticking to that original alliance and taking out someone who was against the alliance type of thing. I agree with everything you said in terms of arguing for the right people and the right argument. I think Leilani and Hannah is the best combination for Pegleg. I think his biggest threat's Matt. Pegleg's one of the most interesting people here because we really can't read this jury at the moment. We really don't know what they're going to value. So Pegleg's, like, as you said, this great medium of everything where he's completely inoffensive.
Yeah, he's done enough of everything, physical, social, strategic, to just be good at all three. I think for Pegleg, if he gets there with Hannah and Leilani, I think Lee is definitely a lock. Doug is someone who can be swayed. I think Chris is someone who's going to be swayed. And I also have Ash and Nathan potentially as people who I think could vote for Pegleg in this sort of scenario. That being said, I don't think anyone is really a lock to vote against him.
Yeah, there's no one on that jury who wouldn't consider voting for Peg. And I don't think they can say that about the rest of the players left.
Speaking of players left, we move then to Hannah. How do you see Hannah's setup going into endgame? Yeah, best final 3. Who do you think Hannah should be targeting to get out from the jury?
So again, Ash.
Yeah.
We know that Hannah doesn't like Ash. She's had a confessional earlier on in the season explaining that she doesn't trust her, etc., etc., etc. The only thing potentially that could change that is not wanting to get rid of another woman from the game, even though it's right at the end. I could see her potentially voting out Nathan. We know she doesn't like Nathan anymore. That would potentially be a move there for her. In terms of what she could argue, I think Hannah's probably one of the most interesting people left. It's similar to Peg, but without the added benefit of Peg being Peg, if you know what I mean. So she's really going to have to pull some moves, take some out of the bag in these last 2 episodes to really convince the jury to vote for it. I don't think she's played terribly. I think she's played solidly. Certainly towards the end of the game, she's been quite under the radar strategically. So I do think there is an argument there that she can make. My concern is her being able to convince people to vote for her over the other people that are left in the game.
That's why I see it as so important that for her, the perfect final 3 is herself, Chris, and Leilani.
Agreed.
Yeah, she has to get rid of Matthew and Pegleg. And I see her narrative as very much like a Survivor Redemption Island, where she's Boston Rob, but she's sat there with 2 people who she can say, nobody liked Chris, who's our Philip in this scenario.
Yeah.
And everyone just thinks Leilani's just grateful to be here. and I think that is her winning story. Her winning story is to pile on the dislike of Chris. You all didn't like him, you all hated him, but actually I made the great moves. I think without Matthew there, without Pegleg there, I think she starts to claim both the Tanuke move and the Nathan move. And I think she can do that in a really good way, where she can say, you didn't recognise it was me, I was undercover.
I think Hannah's ace, I think the ace up her sleeve is that these moves that can be accredited to other people, I think she has a very good way of asserting herself into them and being able to claim them, because we've seen in these scenes, with the Tanuke vote, that wasn't really going to go through based on Chris's merit, even though it was Chris's move. He planned it strategically. It was Hannah and Peg's social gameplay that actually pushed that through. And the same can be said with Nathan. It was Hannah and Peg that actively chose to keep Chris, believing him to be less of a threat at the end. People might not see her as this threat, but I think if she can articulate that to the jury, especially if Peg's on there championing her on, I do think that she has a case here to make.
She has a lot of really friendly people on the jury. I think in this makeup of her, Chris and Leilani, she's guaranteed Lee's votes. She's guaranteed Pegleg's votes. Probably Doug, Lawrence, and Tanuke are really favourable towards Hannah as well. And you only need two of those, really. You only need another two people to win in this scenario. The one challenge she will face, though, is I'm sure questions are going to come up about her pre-merge game.
Yeah.
Do you deserve to be the winner if you've only played the last 13 days?
Yeah, realistically, she didn't start playing hard until the Tanuke vote. So is it frustrating to the earlier jurors that she just stuck to the basic plan every time and it resulted in then going home and then suddenly she's come out fighting? Do you know what I mean? So I do think probably the later it happens in the game, the more important it is to voting at the end. But I do think that people will still take into account the earlier game.
We then move to our final member in our final five, and that is Leilani. Matt, how do you see Leilani's endgame? What are the chances of her winning? Who's the best combination to make her the sole survivor?
Really, when talking about Leilani as a potential winner, you have to look at and discredit the strategic game. And that very much depends on what the jury wants to vote for. Do they put as much value into strategic play? Or do they think, do you know what, at the end of the day, I'm going to vote for the person that I like the most to win? Because I do think undeniably Leilani's social game has been pretty strong. And she has made some moves. We can look back at Fishgate and how she flipped that boat onto Ren when she was the outsider in that tribe. So I do think she has an argument to make. In terms of what she's done in the later game, the edit hasn't really shown us too much. And so I think, for me, I struggle to see what a strong argument she could make for her later game play. I do think if we look across Survivor history, there's quite a few winners who played quite a social-based game. There wasn't too much strategy. The physical game was fine, but not massively important. And they managed to win over people who did play more strategic games just because people liked the social playing more. Leilani stands a chance definitely against Chris. The other person that I'm not sure, I think potentially, depending on how Hannah's viewed, potentially Hannah, I don't think she would beat Peg. Unless the jury are better against Matthew, I can't see her beating Matthew. In terms of the juror removal, Lee, I think not only is Lee the first member of the jury, so, you can always make the easy argument, I'm not doing this offensively, first in, first out kind of thing. But also, obviously, he's someone that voted for her multiple times. He's someone that valued the physical game against all else. And so I think that's probably a good pick for her to take out there. What do you think about Leilani?
Yeah, I really like what you said there about her social game. And I think that is kind of the big thing that she has to hang her hat on throughout this. I only see Leilani winning under a really specific set of circumstances. And that is, we kick off episode 15. Leilani really quickly recognises that she is the swing vote, and she becomes the driving force for voting out Matt. I think that's the first thing that has to happen. She has to win the final individual immunity challenge, and then again be a really active part of voting off Pegleg. Because I think you're right, the optimum way for her to go is Chris and Hannah. And I think Leilani has to do something here where if she has the opportunity to vote someone out from the jury, again, sorry to say it, I think she needs to vote out Ash. She needs to, I think she needs to take away a guaranteed vote from Chris. And in that scenario, I think Lee gives his vote to Hannah. And so it becomes a little bit easier, I think, for Leilani to really zone in on just kind of the votes that she needs. And I think she has to make a pitch that goes something like, I made the final big moves that decided who was here. I won individual immunities when it mattered. When we got to merge, there weren't that many women around, but I'm still here. I think she needs to lean heavily on. You said this was a physical game. Look at me now, though. I'm still here. And then she needs to go full on, and she needs to say, for the last 20 years, I've been the biggest Survivor fan. And she lists every Survivor in chronological order from season 1 through to season 44. And she says, I knew exactly what I was doing the whole time, and this is how I'd lowered my threat level. She's a digger cray for Chris, chuck all the dirt on him that she possibly can. She needs to play down anything that Hannah's done. And in that world, I think she's hoping for the original Calaton votes. Matt, Tanuke, Nathan, Lawrence. I think those are the people really she is making her pitch directly to. And for me, the only way that Leilani can win this potentially is if all those things happen. So nice and simple.
I mean, picture that, but add in throwing out her story about her son, how close they are, what this would mean to them, and then also add in, like, talk to production beforehand. The lights go down, the spotlight comes on, and she starts singing, "If your boobies are too small."
Got to go, finger on the trigger.
The greatest hits medley from Leilani would guarantee she would sweep the jury and get all of the votes.
Yeah, I can't lie. Leilani has the toughest road. I think the toughest pitch based on what we've seen in the edits. It's really interesting though. Her voting record's not that bad.
Yeah, I mean, Leilani's never been in control, but she has consistently been in on the votes. So, although, as we said, it's somewhat unlikely that she can win the game, I don't think it's impossible. I do think, as we said, there are these strict set of rules, which, if that plays out, we could quite easily see Leilani win here.
That being said, we're coming down to kind of the last hour, the 11th hour before the episode itself. So let me know, Matt, what do you think is going to be the final three, and who is your winner pick?
I think Hannah and Leilani are there. I think they are two of our finalists. Whichever of Matt, Chris, or Pegleg sits with them is likely going to be our winner. I will say that if it's Chris that sits with them, I think Hannah also has a shot there. I don't see Matt getting to the end. I don't know why I don't see him getting to the end. I just think, in terms of what we've seen so far with the votes, they tend to be taking out these people that aren't as in tight with them and have also been somewhat in control of some of these moves. And I think Matt fits that bill.
I think he's just too much of a threat. Genuinely, it was so easy when we were thinking about this to pick out how does he win. Lots of people could flip on him. I think, obviously, Hannah is against Matty anyway. I don't think she sees any incentive to work with him in this final game. If Hannah's there, Pegleg's with her, and you only need one of Leilani and Chris, I think either one of those could flip to get Matt out in episode 15.
The interesting thing in terms of the edit and the story that we're seeing coming up to the endgame is, I think Hannah's been well positioned strategically for the story to end in a win. I think Matthew's been positioned well for the story to end in a win. I think Chris has as well, but we've also seen a lot of negativity there. So that gives me pause for thought. What's really interesting for me is that Leilani, Hannah, Pegleg final three. In terms of the story that's been told to us over the last few episodes, it seems like Hannah's more dominant of the pair, but I really think right now I could see Pegleg winning in that grouping. So it's going to be really interesting to see what happens there.
That's pretty much my call as well. I think we're going to see both Matthew and Chris be our final two members of the jury. I think we are heading towards a Pegleg, Hannah, Leilani final three. And in my world, I do think Pegleg takes that one. And just for the reason we said, I think he's done just enough of all the aspects to garner enough votes that he needs to become the sole survivor. Pegleg works for me in my head in terms of being the first winner of this season. I think he's a good representation of what the season's been.
I just want to say as well, the more we've talked over each person's individual game, I do think maybe we've been slightly too low on a couple of them. The more I thought about it, the more there is quite a few solid gameplay moves that have been made throughout the season. So I don't think I don't think we can count anyone out at this point, but I do think that there's 3 people who are more likely to win than others.
It should be really, really exciting. And obviously the 16th is coming up fast. Matt's going to be live tweeting both throughout episode 15 for the hours that Strictly Come Dancing's on.
A man just walked outside my house with a dog. Hashtag people watching.
We should also take the time to confirm that this week an important milestone has been passed for the sit-out bench. This week, Matt became the official winner of the Survivor UK fantasy drafts.
Way.
It is now impossible for me to win, unfortunately. So I needed all of my players to stay in and for yours to go. So you currently sit on 66, whilst I am on 58 with 2 players left. So it's impossible for me to catch you up at this point. Congratulations.
Yes. Thank you. I would like to thank... I don't know.
We'll send a trophy over to Matt. We'll get him to take a picture with it for the Instagram. Matt, any other final thoughts on this final 5? What you're expecting to see? And it looks like we're getting a loved ones visit as well. I know
that's exciting.
You weren't very excited about the letters, but you're more excited about the people coming.
So I want to say about the letters, it was where they were in the season.
Oh, backtrack.
No. Like, I am perfectly fine with letters from home, but it was how long the segment was and how early it was in the season. I think they got that from Australian Survivor, because I've just watched an episode where they're doing letters from home in Australian Survivor pre-merge. But the thing about that is...
they don't show all of them.
Well, also pre-merge is like episode 27 or something. Not episode 4. It does make a massive difference to how well you know people and how much you care. But yeah, I don't even know what I was talking about. I'm excited for this final episode. Excited to see what twists are there. And I do think, looking back on this season, what I said in my predictions episode was correct. That pre-merge would lack strategy, but actually post-merge would start to really pick it up. And I do think if we balance out this season as a whole, it has been a solid season and a good first season for the show. Hopefully now that the audience are invested, hopefully now that people who are going to be applying to be on the show understand the strategic game, we're going to get something as exciting as this merge just throughout the whole of the next season if we get one.
Totally agreed. Let's stick the landing. And that would be the greatest thing in the world, actually, if just after credits roll on episode 16, we cut to a new trailer and it says casting for season 2 now open. That would be chef's kiss.
Oh, because like if we get a second season, I truly believe that we could, like, this can run for a while, especially one season a year. I think the only thing that we need to work on is the media buzz, word of mouth. You know, while I saw 2 million people have been continuing to watch the season, for me, it's weird that we haven't been hearing as much about it. So I would say probably that means that the older demographic is potentially quite invested in the show at the moment. So I think they really need to work on getting more younger viewers who are interested in the show.
Yeah. And that feels fair. And the best way really to do that is to encourage people to listen to the sit-out bench.
We will solve your problems.
The best UK-only Survivor podcast. Matt, for the people, where can they follow us?
Yeah, they can follow us on Instagram at the Sit-Out Bench, all lowercase with full stops in the middle, and over on X at the Sit-Out Bench. Make sure you're there for the great live tweets. There'll probably be too many because I'll be really bored. So, you know, enjoy all my ramblings as I tweet out. Not bored because of the show, I mean bored because I'll have to wait 2 hours in between them.
Yeah, make sure you tweet at Matt and let him know how great Strictly is in between Survivor 15 and Survivor 16. From us here at the Sit-Out Bench, that's everything. See you next time, guys.
See you next time, guys. Bye.